Welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast. I'm Glenn Denny. My guest this week has recently published her PhD entitled Girls' Toys and Boys' Toys, Learning Through Play, which explored primary school children's lived experiences of toys and gender. Now, she's a passionate play worker as well as a lecturer in childhood practice. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sarah Goldsmith.
Thank you very much for having me, Glenn. It's great to be here.
It's fantastic to have you here. We were just saying just before we started recording, I first met you at the International Play Association conference in Glasgow. Yeah. And you're obviously one of the workshops you were doing, apart from being one of the organizing team and like holding things together so well. Like you had so many different roles that week. It was unreal. But one of the workshops you led was talking about your PhD and everything else. And I was just like, this is why I knew I had to get you as a guest on the podcast, because everything you were saying was just like, yes, I can relate to this. I hear this. This is brilliant. And yeah, it's wonderful. So what led you to choose that as a topic for your PhD?
It was actually a advertised PhD. So it was one that Glasgow Caledonian University advertised. And I was doing my master's in childhood and youth studies at the time. And I thought, this sounds interesting. It's something that I would like to have a look at, something I've not really thought a lot about within my role. And I thought it would be really interesting to do. So I applied and was fortunate enough to get the PhD. So I moved up to Glasgow in 2015. And that's my beginning of my PhD journey.
It was amazing. I know you were kind of talking a little bit like, when I was sat in the workshop listening, I mean, I was absolutely glued to it. Normally in these workshops, I took notes, and I have to admit, I didn't take any notes in your one, purely because I was just listening so intently to everything you were saying. And I was just looking at the screen, the facts and figures you put up. I mean, it is a fascinating subject, how toys become genderized. Is genderized the word? I can't even think now, but
genderized is a good word.
Yeah, they become genderized. It's like, but why do you think that is?
Well, it's partly to do with our understanding of what gender is, and partly to do with the toy companies gendering toys. So through color coding, through the gender scripts that are embedded within toys, they become gendered. So a Barbie doll is very pink, and it's very much coded to be for girls. And, a football or, I don't know, a car or something like that is very much gendered and coded to be a toy for boys. And that's to do with our social understanding of what it means to be a girl and be a boy and what we should be playing with, therefore.
Yeah, I think for me, it jars with me that people do that, because that's not the way I was brought up. I was brought up with toys. So, yeah, I'm a boy, my pronouns are he, him, but I, as a child growing up, I had a doll's house, I had a tea set, I did have dolls, but I also had Action Man, and I had cars, and I had Lego, and it's interesting that some parents don't view it that way with toys, but then other families do, and it's interesting that way.
Yeah, and I think it's also to do with the time that you were brought up. So in the kind of the 70s, 80s weren't as gendered. The toys weren't as gendered, but kind of from the 90s, the 2000s, they become a lot more gendered. And Elizabeth Sweet's done research looking at advertisements of gendered toys and has found that they are much more gendered than they were 50 years ago. We have many more toys as well. So the market is crowded with toys. So a way to get in there is to gender the toys, and then it makes it so that people have to buy boys' toys, people have to buy girls' toys. So it means they sell more. So it's also a selling product, selling means as well. So there's different reasons as to why we've got that. And it is a crowded market. People want to sell their toys, and that's one way of doing it, is making them gendered. But it also links into kind of our as society and what we understand girls and boys to play with. which has become in some families more specific about what we should be doing. It is changing. We are kind of coming the other side of it. But there was a period that things were very gendered kind of in the 90s and 2000s.
I can completely relate to that. So I started my practice in the late 90s, once I qualified. And again, for me, I've always just seen toys as toys, but there were certain families within my very first setting that I worked in. Bearing in mind, this was quite a strict community, like, girls were girls and boys were boys, and it was very like that were the genders, that was it. Never the twain shall meet, etc. But it was interesting that we had some boys that wanted to play with dolls and wanted to put on the big froofy dressing up clothes and the clip top shoes and all that. And it's like, well, yeah, go ahead. This is not them experimenting with their gender. This is them just playing with something because it makes a nice sound, or it feels nice, or whatever it might be. But there was particular children, it was like, well, if we knew that they were getting picked up by dad, it was like this had to be off them quick. And it's like, oh my goodness, what a way to enforce stereotypes almost. And that still happens. We still have parents coming in to pick up and we'll get really cross if the son's wearing a dress, and it usually is the son wearing a dress that's an issue. And I think that comes along with fears around sexuality, and also about being a man's man. So we tend to see boys, if they're being action heroes and playing army and all that kind of stuff, that means that they're a really good, strong man and doing what they need to do. But if they're wearing a dress, then their masculinity is threatened. And some people don't like that, and they're worried about what that may happen. And as you said, it doesn't really matter. They're children, they're playing. And even if it does, if it does mean that a child turns out to be gay, it's not because they're wearing a dress. There's other things that are factoring in that, and it's about their choice. They should be able to play the way they want to. And we shouldn't judge them on that, because it is part of play. And that's really important. And we're thinking about children's play needs and play preferences, and that we're helping and supporting them to play in the way they want to. And that might be that might not go along with what our ideals are of play or of gender, but it's about them playing the way they want to. It is, because play is the way they figure out their place in the world. And that's super important. But I think as well, now we're living in a society where gender is no longer just black and white. It's no longer male and female. We've got we've got non-binary, and we've got gender neutral and gender fluid, and it kind of all blends in that. But again, do you feel, I'm going to put you on the spot slightly, but do you feel as well that this might also come down to parents' worry about sexuality of children? And do the lines get blurred, is what I'm asking, between gender and sexuality?
Yeah, I think they do. And that's a difficult, because they are interconnected, and gender is intersectional. It's all mixed up in sexuality, in religion, in culture. So there's lots of other things that are impacting on how we understand and what we believe and expect of children's gendered performances and beings. So all of that has an impact in how we understand gender and what we see is happening. So I think, definitely it's kind of intersectional with sexuality, and how children want to express themselves. But again, it's about play and about that performance, and children are experimenting. They're finding out what they enjoy, what they like, what they don't like. And that play is the key place, as you said, for children to explore all of that. And those negotiations that happen all around it, whether that's with other children or adults within the play setting, or their parents outside of the play setting, that's all part of learning and understanding what makes them and how they want to express that. So it all kind of is interconnected.
It's kind of just a whole jumble of everything together. Isn't it?
And that's what makes children's gendered negotiations in play tricky sometimes, because it's very contextual. So some children might it might be really easy to conform or police gendered boundaries during play because they're happy to do that. But some children will challenge those gender boundaries and cross them. And in some contexts that can be really easy. So if your play setting is really open and is happy for you to play whatever you like, then that'll be really easy for children to cross those boundaries if they choose to. But in other contexts, if there's other adults or other children who are policing those gender borders, those gender boundaries, then it makes it a lot harder. So it's the context that that's happening in makes it easy or hard for children to try and negotiate and challenge those gender boundaries that may be created by gender toys.
Definitely. Now, for your study as well, you used primary school children. Was there a reason behind using that rather than, say, secondary school children, or more difficult, I suppose, would be early years?
Yeah, good question. And it's partly because of my background. I am a play worker, and I wanted to use a play work approach to my thesis and my PhD, but also children in that kind of middle age group, that 4 to kind of 10, 12 age group, are quite often missing from research. So there's been loads of research done with early years children around toys and gender, but not so much with that middle age group. There's a bit more with older children and teenagers. It's slightly different because they're coming into puberty. There's lots of other things that are influencing that, and they don't play with toys so much. So the reason for looking at that middle age group was to see if what was happening in the early years, previous research, was continued through that middle age group. But also I wanted to speak to the children and find out what their reasoning was as to why they preferred different toys. So lots of research that's been done previously was about toy preferences for children in early years, but that's because they have limited discussions and articulating their feelings. They didn't really ask them about how they felt about that. So there's limitations in what you can find from those research. So asking children about their toy preferences, but then asking them why, gave me that rich data to kind of find out a bit more about why they were playing with the toys that they picked, or why they enjoyed them. So that kind of gave me some more information to then see how children negotiated gender when they were playing. So,
I mean, I suppose the question is, how did you do? I mean, there's, like we were saying earlier, that there is thousands of toys out there. How did you go to narrow that down to kind of get the children to decide what, obviously, because I mean, they might have a limited view of some toys, or it was, how did that information get put across to the children for them to pick and to kind of discuss?
Yeah, good question. So it was interesting. So there's been some previous research looking at specifically at certain toys to see how children categorize toys. And that was done with kind of up to 5-year-olds. And that was by Blakemore and Centers, and they looked at they categorized specific toys into strongly masculine, moderately masculine, gender neutral, moderately feminine, and strongly feminine. And they picked toys by asking adults which toys they thought were masculine and feminine. So I used that research, but it was quite a few years ago. So a lot of the toys, and it was in America. So some of the toys children wouldn't have recognized now, because the types of toys that children play with change. And some of them were American, so they weren't necessarily what we would see here in the UK. So the other thing I did, I spoke to the children. Part of my research before deciding what I was going to do was to speak to children, to ask them what they wanted me to ask them and find out. And one of the girls came up with a toy fact file. So she said, oh, we should make up a fact file, which they've been doing at school, not about toys, but about something, I think it was pets or something, that said what their favorite toy was, why they liked it, and they drew a picture of it. So we kind of made up a toy fact file, similar kind of things about what toys they like, what toy was their favorite toy, why they liked it, and they drew a picture of it. And so I took that to primary schools, and I think I spoke to about 150 children. They filled this in, and that gave me some other toys that they enjoyed playing with. So then I categorized them using the same way that they did in the research. And that gave me a range of toys across those 5 categories. And then I did a card sorting activity where I had pictures of the toys, and I did individual interviews with children, and asked them, I said to them, which you may like to play with all of these toys, but which would you most like to play with and why? And so they categorize the toys, and they kind of put them in 3 categories. They said toys I liked to play with, kind of liked, and didn't like. And then from that, I was able to discuss with them why they put them in those categories. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. So the categories, so like so for the ones, say, for example, that they didn't like, what were some of the reasons that were given?
So a lot of them, and I didn't ask them anything about gender, so it was all about the toys, and I wanted to see if the gender came out, and it did. So for quite a lot of the when I analyzed them, the boys really didn't like anything in the strongly feminine or moderately feminine, which you would expect. And the reason they said that, they're a girl's toy, they're pink, and when they came across them in the pile, they virtually automatically put them in the don't like pile, because they could see they were pink, they were color coded for girls, or pink, they were sparkly, they were dolls, those kinds of things. So they were very much in that don't like category. The girls, so what I did find was that there was a definite distinction between girls and boys. More girls liked toys across the range, whereas the boys didn't like the moderately feminine and the strongly feminine toys. Some boys liked some of them, but it was only kind of 1 or 2. But the girls did like more toys across the different categories. And that's partly because boys' toys are a bit more exciting than girls' toys, and they offer more range of play types.
Yeah.
So they want to be able to access those boys' toys. But there was a couple of categories that were, so there were some very specific girls' versions of toys. So I specifically put in Lego Friends, which is the girls category of toys, girls theme, and Lego City. And the boys kind of said, the girls, the Lego Friends wasn't real Lego. And that was partly because of the color coding, but partly because the figurines are very different to the Lego minifigures. So they are kind of, it is kind of a different category. So you can see why younger children would say, that's not real Lego.
Yeah.
So girls' versions of toys really put off boys. They're not meant for boys. They're designed specifically for girls. So that kind of advertising works well.
It certainly does. I mean, there is a bit as well. You talked about it at the start there about, the marketing, the heavy sort of marketing of things. I mean, like, for example, I was talking to one of my colleagues today, and we're talking about like gender and toys and things like that. And we both agreed, it's like, if you walk into, say, like, one of the big toy superstores, you walk in and it's so divisive. Again, it's like, do you go down this aisle, which is all pink and fluffy, or do you go down the big bold blue aisle, which is like, all the really good toy? There's nothing that, it's not just mixed up. It's very, very divisive.
Yeah. And there's been lots of work. Let Toys Be Toys have done lots of campaigns to try and minimize those girls and boys aisles. And a lot of stores have taken down the girls and boys kind of naming those aisles. But because toys are gender color coded, it's really hard to get rid of that, because they can take down girls and boys, but because they're blue or because they're pink, you still have that division. And that's what creates those gender boundaries, which opposes girls and boys, and ostracizes them to be to play with different things. And that's kind of socially constructed, that girls play with good pink and boys play with blue.
I was going to say, it's almost a bit like Pavlov and his dogs, isn't it?
Yes.
You are like programmed to go like, oh, it's pink, I must go this way. I mean, I remember way back in one of my settings, I mean, talking about the color thing, and one of my boys in the room went, boys can't wear pink, that's a girl's color. And I'm like, really? Why can't they wear pink? Because it's for girls. So just to spite it, we didn't wear uniform in this setting. So the next day he was in and I came in and I was wearing a pink polo shirt. And honestly, his face was just like, but you're wearing pink. I said, because boys can wear pink too. It's just color.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we need more of that. We need more role models to show that it's okay for boys to wear pink, or for, to wear tutus or whatever. Because seeing somebody do that shows that it's okay, and the more people that do it, it kind of breaks down those barriers. And I think we're seeing more male football teams wearing pink now in the strips, and so that beginning to break some of those barriers down. But we're born into a gendered world, so everything is gendered, and it's really hard to get away from that. And as human beings, we like categories, and we like to fit in. So if we want to fit in, we'll conform to those gender stereotypes, because it means that we'll be more accepted. And but I do think that this is changing. So from speaking to the children, there were boys who were much more accepting of other boys if they chose to wear pink or they chose to wear dresses. They were like, yeah, that's okay, as long as it's their choice. So things are changing. And we need to keep that momentum going, because it's not just girls that are limited by gender stereotypes, it's boys as well. So we need to make sure that we're breaking down the stereotypes for girls and boys.
It's funny that I was literally just going to say to you about, because it is limiting them, because what they are expected to play with rather than what they actually want to play with.
Yes,
there is that limit being put on them.
Yeah. And so some of the girls were talking to me about sports, actually. So they, because I think there was a football and stuff like that in the toys, and they said that they really enjoyed playing football and liked to do it, but they couldn't do it because the boys would stop them from playing, because they said they weren't any good. And actually, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because girls aren't taught how to play football, or don't get the time to play football. So their skill is not as good. So the boys don't want them to play because they slow the game, get down, or they don't know the rules. So if we were teaching girls as well how to play, then they'd be more likely to be able to play better. And obviously there are some girls who do like playing and will go, but they have to go above and beyond boys in skill level to be able to play properly.
Can I just point out the Lionesses? Excuse me, they're better. They're better than
Go
the
Lionesses.
Absolutely. Honestly, I hate football normally. I'll be there for a Lionesses match because I know it's going to be good.
They were great.
Yeah, again, I mean, things like that, though, like in all seriousness, that's actually reinforcing the fact that girls can do the same as boys.
Yep.
And boys can do exactly the same as girls. So,
it's having the opportunity, and having the time and the space and the permission to do that. And sometimes that might mean, and some of the girls said that they did play football at school, and they had mixed teams, but the boys wouldn't pass to them. So even if they were playing, they couldn't play the game because the boys wouldn't pass the ball to them. So there's different ways that girls can be stopped and boys can be stopped from playing, because of that policing of other children or adults, to stop them from kind of crossing that boundary.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's almost like I don't know, I suppose a societal kind of barrier that we become so entrenched in this, narrow field of, one gender and the other gender, that actually it's difficult, and children almost have to fight for the right to play the way they want to. That's not really, that kind of goes against UN Charter for the Rights of the Child as well. It's like children have a right to play. It doesn't say boys have a right to play with this and girls have a right to play with that. It's children have a right to play.
Yeah.
That's embedded in what we do.
Yeah. And so as practitioners, we need to be advocating for that and supporting all children to be able to play the way they want to. So that might be about breaking down those barriers and supporting girls to play football, which might mean having a girls' football team or a girls' football time so that they can learn the skills to be good enough, to upskill themselves to be able to play with the boys, or getting the boys involved to help them to play better. But also, boys being able to wear those princess dresses if they want to, or do some crochet or whatever it is. It's giving opportunities for everyone to play, but we also still need to be aware of the barriers that might still prevent children from doing that. So that might be about what the resources that we use in the setting. It might be how we set those resources out, so that we're not perpetuating those gender stereotypes and preventing children from playing in the way they want to.
I mean, I know in my own setting, so my setting is slightly different from a traditional nursery. I'm an outdoor nursery, so we are outside 90% of the day. And actually, we're all just together. So we all go and play, we all climb trees, we all dig in the digging area. Like, literally, my children go home covered in mud. Great, perfect day. They go home clean. I'm worried what happened. But it's that bit where it's unintentionally ungendered. It's like we don't set out to be specifically, we don't genderize anything. It's just, this is what we do. I think for us, it's just a normal part of our routine that, yes, we have dolls and we have certain, we have tea stuff in the home corner inside, but actually it's just there. It's for everybody. It's not, I don't do the colors, if you like. It's like, I'm not going to have everything pink. I'm not going to have everything blue. But it's just, for me, it's unintentional, I think.
Yeah, and also if you're outside, there's less gender cues out there. So, you're using natural resources, you're using loose parts. So those things aren't gendered. So they're not going to create those gender boundaries. So you're starting from a space that is less gendered anyway. And as you say, if you have got resources and toys, then try and make them more gender neutral. And if you've got kind of your home corner and stuff like that, maybe changing what it's called, so that you're just, I don't know, cooking space or whatever, so that everybody can do that. Because if people kind of had that expectation that women will be in the kitchen and they will be at home, so there's that unconscious bias around gender that kind of comes out in some of the things that we might unintentionally do, that create gender boundaries. So it's kind of thinking a bit more deeply about our spaces and what we're doing with those spaces and how we're kind of setting them up, and whether that plays into those gender stereotypes without us realizing them.
I think there is a bit that you're right. There is, for some. I've worked with practitioners in the past. I'm not going to say my current team because we're all working together with the same aim that we play. But I've worked with practitioners in the past where it's like, well, I'm just going to go take the girls off and we're going to do something nice over here. If you want to go and take the boys. And I think, again, it's down to that stereotype of men in childcare. It's like, well, you can do all the rough and tumble stuff and we'll do all the pretty stuff over here. And it's like, it's not going to work. I'm going to go and do this stuff. You go and do the rough and tumble. Yeah. I think it's kind of not fighting amongst ourselves, but standing up for ourselves or standing up for the rights of our children to say, well, just because I'm male within this sector doesn't mean I have to do all the rough and tumble stuff. Maybe I do the baking,
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, that's that role playing and that we're showing children that men and women can do everything. So having the male members of staff going to do the cooking, the female members of staff climbing the trees and doing the rough and tumble play, it means that you're kind of showing that diversity within your setting, and that's really important as well. So it's all part of that, is to be able to show all of those things.
I know it's interesting you said about diversity, and that kind of triggered with me as well, that we are supposed to be having a diverse and inclusive society. And if we start from our very youngest age by making sure that everything is accessible to everyone, and that our practitioners are being as open and inclusive as possible and being their authentic selves, then that's going to push forward to our children as well.
Yeah, and challenging each other, in front of the children. If something happens and you accidentally or on purpose say something, that you are challenging it in a constructive way in front of the children to show that it's okay to do that, because sometimes we don't do that, and then that shows that it's okay for things to kind of slip under the radar and happen without us thinking or challenging it. Yeah.
I mean, I know as well, recently I was having conversations with some of the children, and we were talking about what they wanted to do when they were grown up, just one of these random conversations. And I think this is very conscious with me when I'm kind of like, because I've had many of these conversations over the years, but I'm very, I do consciously think about it. And it's like, I turn around to the girls and say, oh, so what do you want to be? Do you want to be a scientist, or do you want to be an engineer? And I deliberately turn the roles around. It's like, I don't use the traditional roles. I might say to one of the boys, do you want to be a chef? Or, do you want to help people? Do you want to be a nurse? It's like I reverse the roles that we're traditionally viewing, because I want children to know that that's okay for them to do that.
Yeah, and that's a great way of doing it, and it triggers those discussions as well, and gets them thinking about, oh, I can do that, or should I think about those sorts of things, rather than the traditional kind of career routes that girls and boys tend to get pushed into. And just having men within childcare is great, isn't it? Because that's traditionally a female workforce, and I think 90% of the workforce are women. So it's good to have
98% actually.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, it's a big thing, and I think we need more people coming through, and obviously that's also connected to other societal issues around pay and around value of careers. So it's interlinked with lots of other things. There's lots of other things that kind of link into why we have those gender roles and why we kind of perpetuate them, and the flexibility is, I suppose, as well of careers. If you're looking after children, you're having your own children, looking after them, having that flexibility tends to be those more caring roles, which maybe are not paid as well, not valued as much. So there's reasons why men and women go into those different careers sometimes.
There's a lot more work to do, I think.
Definitely, yeah. We're getting there. We're chipping away.
Slowly but surely. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the podcast, but I just want to say a massive, massive thank you. It's just been wonderful to reconnect with you again since we were sort of talking to each other at IPA. It was amazing. And yeah, keep going, because we need more voices talking about this, most definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great conversation. And I hope your listeners get something from it as well.
I'm certain they will. Dr. Sarah Goldsmith, thank you.
Thank you.